Welcome back, everybody. Arc Flash here. I'm glad you're able to join me for part 2 of 3 in this Mega Man X retrospective and why we love him so much set of videos. Watch out for part 3, that'll be coming out next week, but for now let's jump into Mega Man X 4 through 6. Mega Man X4 being released on, at that time, the new generation systems in 1997. Now myself personally, I think this was the absolute perfect time for an upgrade to the Mega Man X formula. I think it was kind of getting to a point where we were ready for this new generation to come out, show off the increased graphical prowess of the PlayStation, especially when we saw what could happen with the Mega Man series when we saw Mega Man 8. This game adding all new anime cutscenes, voice acting, which, to be honest, quite terrible, just like Mega Man 8. We're going to get into that eventually, but just to catch us up on the story so far, in this game we have two large Reploid armies that are existing to counter the Mavericks, the Maverick Hunters, and a new one called the Repliforce. They originally were cooperating quite a few times, and during this time Zero befriended Colonel and Iris of the Repliforce. While they seemed important at the time, they were more one-and-done characters for X4. Now in this game, one day the aerial city Sky Lagoon was attacked by Mavericks, and they sabotaged its power generator. This caused Sky Lagoon to fall to the city below, killing thousands. As the Repliforce was present in the area, they were put under suspicion, and the Colonel, as the leader of the Repliforce, was asked that they surrender for questioning. The Colonel, however, refuses to surrender and leaves with his sister Iris. Their leader that you see here, the general with the big metal mustache, is furious that he was suspected and the army was suspected of this incident and starts a rebellion to build a Reploid-only nation. This incident causes the entire Repliforce to be considered Mavericks, and the Maverick Hunters are sent in to stop them, leading to the Great Repliforce War. And as you see in the opening cutscene here, big shocker, Sigma behind it all once again trying to play both sides to meet his own ends. And he is once again the main antagonist for Mega Man X and Zero. Biggest difference right out of the gate for this one, besides having all the updated graphics and sound that you would expect from a new generation system, the fact that you can select from either Mega Man X or Zero at the outset of the game, which was one of the coolest features at the time. X was a fully fleshed out character as well as Zero, and the fact that you could play as either one from beginning to end was a really great feature for the time, and one of the reasons why Mega Man X4 is one of my favorite of the X series, because Zero offered such a different type of gameplay from X. It almost doubled the length of the game, essentially being able to play through the whole thing as Zero as well. Now before we get into X and Zero and all the differences between them and all the things that this game does over the first 3 X games, we have to address the voice acting, because I know that for some it detracts from the game so much that it makes them have a hard time even playing it. That's not the case for me. I still love Mega Man X4. As I said, it's one of my favorites, but we have to talk about it because it is absolutely horrid.
Brave soldiers of Retropolis, we have all been wrongfully judged as Mavericks by the humans. We cannot suffer this indignity and live in disgrace. We will build our own nation of Reploids. But remember, this is neither about insurrection nor rebellion against our human creators. This is about our liberty and security. We must battle for our own individual rights and our own survival. Together we will build our nation, a sanctuary for all Reploids, our own utopia. Let us forge onward towards a new golden era for the Repliforce.
I too share the general sentiment. Take heed, we have no other choice. Let us fight valiantly, with courage and pride, without fear, for we are the Repliforce. The most powerful army in history! Yeah!
Oh, well that wasn't that bad, you think? Maybe the voice actors were just having an off day. Well, take a listen to this.
This is Maverick Hunter Headquarters.
Zero.
It's good to see you're safe, X. I was really worried about you.
Sorry about that.
Don't worry. It's all over. Go home and rest. You've earned it.
But Zero, what if I become one of the Mavericks?
Don't ask such a silly question. I'm breaking contact now.
Wait, Zero!
Okay, wait. So first of all, why does X sound like he's 10? He's supposed to be a Mega Man, not a Mega Boy. I mean, it was more understandable with the original Mega Man because he was more childlike, but this guy's supposed to be a man, a badass, and he sounds like he hasn't even gone through puberty yet. Not only that, you have to hear him constantly whine and scream in that childish voice incessantly throughout the entire game. Make it stop! Please! Make it stop! But easily the most infamous of all these scenes is the one with Zero and Iris that we all know too well. Ugh.
Iris! 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 Ah! No, this isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on. What? What am I fighting for?
Now, to me, in a way, it's sad that there has been fan redubs of those scenes that have been 1,000 times better. It adds a lot more to the game. And that was always kind of one of the problems with this and the way that these scenes played out, because this is supposed to be a much harder edge, more mature story. And when we have such comically bad voice-acted scenes, it really detracts from that story. And I think if there were more care put into that voice acting, that it would have enhanced the story a lot more than they intended and would have been closer to the original intentions of what the creators would want for the story in the English version as well as the Japanese version. And with Mega Man 8, you can forgive it a little bit more just because of the more hammy and cheesy storyline, but this one, having the serious one, I felt like it detracted from it a lot more. Now, lucky for us, the rest of the game fared much better, gameplay excellent, so let's get into some differences between X and Zero. So Mega Man X, this one, the obligatory leg upgrade, actually allowing him to hover this time, which, again, more small changes trying to keep adding to that variety in the gameplay. It just added more things that X was able to access by utilizing the hover ability. This time the helmet upgrade actually allowing you to use your special weapons as much as you want, which I felt like was definitely one of the more overpowered uses of the helmet in most of these games. It was really nice being able to use those special weapons as much as you wanted though, and it was something that you definitely were used to playing Mega Man. One of the other things that was a little different about this one was you actually had the ability to have two different types of X-Busters, one of which you could charge to do 4 stronger X-Buster shots, and the other of which would leave a giant energy sphere every time you shot it that would stay behind and continuously damage your enemies, in addition to being able to charge up any Robot Master weapon and utilize it in a different way. But that was always the one that I felt like was the more powerful one to utilize, just because of the fact that you could still continue to jump around and move and dodge the enemy attacks while your shot would keep damaging the enemy after you shot your X-Buster. And that finally leads me to point number 4 about why I feel like people enjoy the Mega Man X series and why he's lasted so long, is that the difficulty in the X games feels like it's more balanced overall. I feel like with these games they give you a lot more tools to utilize to defeat your enemies. The challenge is still there. It's definitely not as challenging as some of the older Mega Man games, with the exception of, in this series up to this point that we've covered, maybe Mega Man X3 would be considered more challenging. But I really feel like they made the games more accessible to everyone while still keeping a good amount of challenge in there. It's not like these games were easy by any means. I just think that they gave you more skills and tools to utilize, which is why it made it feel like it was a little bit more balanced in that respect. Now that may not be the case with some of the newer Mega Man X games, but I feel like with those it was more of a case of bad game design more than anything really. With the ones that we've covered up to this point, I feel like even through probably Mega Man X5 to arguably X6, you did have that difficulty balance that drew more players in while still maintaining enough challenge to keep some of the veterans interested in the franchise. One of the other things I always really enjoyed about Mega Man X4 was just how everything was bigger, louder, more colorful, the graphics, just seeing these gigantic bosses that you had to defeat. It was really a sight to behold at that time, and it just wowed me when I was younger, just seeing everything that the PlayStation 1 was capable of as a system. And I think that this game utilized a lot of its capabilities. I wouldn't necessarily say to its full extent, because there's obviously not a lot of 3D graphics going on here, but just the fact that they're able to utilize all these extra colors and sounds and music, that at the time it was really an eye-catching thing to see. And you saw things that the Super Nintendo just wasn't capable of, so that definitely gave it an advantage over some of the games that came after it that had that initial wow factor that we hadn't seen before. I think being able to play as Zero at the time that this game came out was just such an awesome thing for people. The fact that he had his own full-fledged storyline, moves, gameplay that was above and beyond anything he could do in Mega Man X3, that made me love this game so much more, because like a lot of people, I think Zero is a really compelling character, and he offers such a different way to play from Mega Man that it really freshens up the gameplay. You get sick of playing Mega Man X, you can jump right into Zero. It offers a completely different experience. I think one of the most interesting things about Zero is that he learns moves in a different way than Mega Man X does. It's just enhancing his sword techniques. It doesn't really completely change how he plays, but he almost plays more like a fighting game character, that you have to learn different combos and different attacks in that way. So he's definitely a more challenging character to use over X. I know a lot of the hardcore players seem to prefer him just because he does offer that stiffer challenge, because he has to play close range, but he also has the advantage of having a lot of very powerful moves over X. So if you can learn to utilize his skills, you become very, very deadly. One final thing I'll mention before we move on to X5, guys, is that you do get, through the use of a code, X's ultimate armor called the Nova Armor. It allows you to use the Nova Strike move. And similar to the fourth armor, but you do get unlimited use of this super move, the Nova Strike, which is kind of like their version of their Street Fighter type move, power move that they always give you. And with Zero, the code gives you the Black Armor, which is purely cosmetic, doesn't add anything to his moveset or powers, just for looks. By the time we get to the end of Mega Man X4, it's made pretty clear that Dr. Wily was involved in the creation of Zero. It was his last greatest creation, and that ultimately the hunters have to fight the Colonel and defeat him, as well as the General. When you play as Zero, Iris is angered by the Colonel's death and fights Zero as well. The battle leaves her mortally wounded, and she dies in Zero's arms. Playing as X, you end up fighting Double, another agent of the Retropolis, who is later revealed to be a spy of Sigma. Double as well dies after he's defeated by X. When X and Zero finally reach the General, they fight him, and he's defeated. And in the last stages of the game on a weapon station, Sigma prepares to destroy Earth. But after Sigma's defeated, he tries to deal one final blow by powering up the weapon station in a last-ditch effort to get the last laugh on Mega Man X and Zero. However, the General decides to sacrifice himself as one last act of redemption for all the pain and misery that he's caused everyone up to this point. So the General finally sacrifices himself to prevent the weapon from destroying Earth. as Mega Man X and Zero escape the weapon station. And as X and Zero head back to Maverick headquarters while contemplating all of their actions in the Great Retropolis War, X wonders if he someday too could become a Maverick, just as his former comrades did during the war. And these events lead into the ones that follow in Mega Man X5. Mega Man X5 initially being released in 2001 in North America, so quite a few years after Mega Man X4, bigger gap in the series releases than you'd typically see up to this point. Alright guys, I really appreciate you sticking with me. I know this is a long one. X's games really cover a lot of ground, and I think X5 is the game where a lot of people kind of start to wonder if Mega Man X just started to get a little too complicated with the story, a little too convoluted. There's a lot of stuff to cover here in this one, so try to stick with me. I'll try to make it as easy to understand as I can. I know even I get confused by it as many times as I've played through this game and read through the stories on different websites and things like that. It still gets pretty convoluted, so we'll try to get through it together. This game taking place several months after the Retropolis War, the Earth is finally at peace, at least for a time. All the space colonies damaged during the war are finally repaired, except for one colony named Eurasia. However, before repairs could be completed on Eurasia, a new antagonist named Dynamo, that you're seeing on the screen right here, took control of the station. After taking control, he scattered a virus through the colony and used its artificial gravity systems to set it on a collision course towards Earth. And within 16 hours the station will collide with Earth and wipe out all life on the planet. As you can see here again, Sigma being involved. Is anyone else getting sick of this guy? I mean, he's in every single game. You kill him 1,000 times over and he just keeps coming back. They need to come up with a new villain already. Anyway, as you can see here, the game, unlike Mega Man X4, just having still frames of animation to tell the story rather than anime cutscenes. I'm not sure if they were trying to save on production costs or what the idea was behind that, but definitely a little bit of a downgrade as far as the story is concerned. But I guess I'm not sure, maybe because of the terrible voice acting of the American version of Mega Man X4, they decided to go this route because they didn't want to spend the money paying for animation or professional voice actors. One thing I thought was pretty interesting in the opening stage of this is that if you pick X right away, you start off with his 4th armor. The one you're seeing here is the ultimate armor on this playthrough, but normally you would start off with his 4th armor, and I thought that was pretty cool that they actually let you keep some of your powers from the previous game instead of inexplicably stripping them away like they usually would. You can actually use some upgraded attacks from the previous game. So if you start off as X, you get that 4th armor, and Zero actually starts off with his Z Buster, which is pretty cool from Mega Man X3, so it gives him that long range attack that he needs. But if you start off with X, Zero loses that Z Buster initially. However, if you choose Zero in the first stage, X actually loses his 4th armor, so that's kind of an interesting choice. It depends on how you would like to play the game, if you want to start with Zero and don't care about the 4th armor, or if you don't care about the Z Buster. Me personally, I always picked X just because I was used to playing X in those initial stages, but just something that was nice that they added into the game that added just another little wrinkle into the formula. And wait, what's this? Ducking? In a Mega Man game? Blasphemy! No, but I was surprised it actually took them this long to add a simple ability like ducking into Mega Man. I thought it was a much overdue ability, and so I was glad to see it added in this game. And so after the beginning stage and the initial fight with Sigma, everyone begins to realize that Sigma's true purpose was to purposely lose that initial fight. And the reason for doing this is sort of twofold. First, he wants to discover how to unlock Zero's true hidden power in order to figure out how to defeat Mega Man X. And he also wants to spread the Maverick virus across Earth after his defeat, throwing it into chaos, in addition to sending Eurasia to Earth on a collision course through the use of Dynamo. So in other words, Sigma really, really, really hates Earth, hates Mega Man X, hates humans. He pretty much just hates everything. So again, the Maverick Hunter group only having 16 hours to stop this collision of Eurasia with planet Earth. And in order to prevent that from happening, they have two options. Their first option is to fire a super weapon called the Enigma at the Eurasia colony. And should that fail, their second option is to pilot a space shuttle into the Eurasian colony and destroy it that way. And so the reason why X and Zero are involved is because they're trying to collect parts for this old weapon, the Enigma, and also for the space shuttle in order to maximize their chances of victory. And this time they have the help of some new teammates, Alia, Douglas, and Cygnus, who you're seeing in this cutscene right here. And coincidentally, it just so happens that all of these parts are held by 8 Maverick robots. And that's where X and Zero's story begins after the initial opening cutscene, is to go ahead and try to defeat all of the 8 Maverick robots again in order to get those parts. Now the biggest problem with this whole storyline that I personally have, and I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I'm sure other people feel this way too, is that whether the Enigma and shuttle succeed or fail is random, totally random. And the chances of the Enigma actually working are pretty low compared to the shuttle. So even if you do everything absolutely correctly, it's totally randomly determined whether you're able to get the best ending or not, which is pretty strange to me. I mean, you'd think if you'd go through all of the trouble to do everything properly that they would reward you by giving you the best ending in the game, but that just isn't always the case. So let's get into some gameplay aspects, and then we'll try to comb through all the complications that is the ending of Mega Man X5. X5 has quite a few features that some of the other games did not have. First of all, you have many different types of armor you can pick from with X. The first of the new ones being the Falcon armor. And the aptly named Falcon armor allows you to take flight for a short period of time, which was pretty different compared to just his normal hovering and air dashing abilities that we were used to in the past. And aside from that multi-directional maneuvering that you saw, your charge shot is a little bit different there. You have the ability to pierce through walls with your powered up X-Buster shot, because that's one thing that they did change in this game, is that you're no longer able to pierce through walls with your normal X-Buster. I'm sure they'd made that change to give you more motivation to use the Falcon armor, because one of the disadvantages is that you can no longer charge up special weapons with it. An additional thing they added that you're seeing here is that they give you hostages you can rescue that restore your health and will give you an extra life as well. This mechanic is used quite a bit through some of the rest of the X games. This is the one where it first made an appearance, and it becomes more important as the games go on. And finally, in addition to X's Falcon armor, his Force/Fourth armor, and his Ultimate armor, he also gets the Gaia armor. And this one's pretty interesting. It allows you to walk on spikes. You can cling to walls indefinitely without sliding down them. Your Mega Buster shot is quite a bit different in that it's shorter but much more powerful. The charge time is less. As you'll see here during the fight with Zero, it's almost functioning like a shotgun in a way, and it's just purely a power-based armor. He doesn't have the ability to use his special weapons, and he also loses the ability to dash in midair, so it's definitely a lot slower and less mobile. So you do have tons of different options on how you want to play this game. One thing that I thought was pretty cool too is the Gaia armor and Falcon armor both have their own Giga attacks. Sort of similar to X2 with the Giga Crush. They're a little bit different, but it's kind of nice having more powerful attacks to utilize again, besides the Nova Strike from X4. One quick thing that I thought was neat too was the Shadow Devil, kind of like the Yellow Devil's brother from the original Mega Man, makes an appearance in this game, and he transforms into something resembling Dr. Wily's castle, so I thought that was just kind of a neat little Easter egg that they threw in there. Playing as Zero this time around, I felt like wasn't really a whole lot different than playing him in X4. He does have some different moves at his disposal than he did in the previous game, but overall he feels pretty similar. I enjoy playing him more in this one just because he seems like he has a little more versatility, more combo attacks. And of course you do have the use of that Z-Buster this time around, which gives him much needed range to his attacks as well. One interesting thing about him too is that you'll see in the bottom left of the screen it says normal. There will be parts in the game that you run into little purple Sigma heads, and that's actually the Sigma virus, and if too many of them touch you, you'll get infected by the virus. And the interesting thing is, if X gets infected, he'll slowly start to lose health, whereas if Zero gets infected, he actually gets stronger. So that was a kind of a little interesting thing to note while you're playing. Because from what I can decipher from his origins, that due to the programming bug that was in him from his creation by Dr. Wily, he was basically insane when he first came out of that capsule. So when he was infected with the Maverick virus along with Sigma, it somehow made him sane, I guess, in a way, if that makes any sense. Maybe it somehow fixed the programming bug that was in him while it drove Sigma insane. I don't know. You guys can definitely feel free to disagree with me if you want to. That's just my take on it. Additionally, Zero does gain power with the black armor in this game. In X4, like I said, it was just for cosmetic purposes. This game you actually do get an increase in your weapon energy and abilities, strength and whatnot, having the black armor. Okay guys, so let's see if we can make sense of the ending of X5, and then we'll jump into X6. Alright guys, you remember at the beginning of the Mega Man X5 portion of this video how I talked about the ending was pretty complex and convoluted? Well, here we go. Now, as I said, chances are, even if you collect all the parts for the Enigma weapon under the time limit, and you collect all the parts for the shuttle under the time limit, you're probably going to end up with the ending where Zero takes the shuttle and crashes it into the Eurasian colony. Now, what's interesting about this is that Keiji Inafune, from what I've read, actually wanted Zero to die at the end of this game. This was intended to be the last game in the Mega Man X series on the PlayStation, and I don't know if anything changed on the back end in the 11th hour that they decided to have Zero live, because they did come out with a Mega Man X6 later, and from what I've read, it seemed like Mr. Inafune was not heavily involved in the development of X5 and was not involved at all in the development of X6, so I'm not really sure when they decided to do it this way, and it just didn't seem like Mr. Inafune was very happy with that decision. I think he wanted Zero to die at the end of X5. That was supposed to be the end of it, and that was going to lead right into Mega Man Zero, but Capcom decided to go a different route with the series and come out with Mega Man X6 first. Alright, so let's talk about some of the possible endings of this while we watch one of the endings from the game, and we'll try to sort this out. So, as we said, either the weapon Enigma can succeed or fail in destroying the space colony. So if the Enigma fails, only part of Eurasia is destroyed, and all it does is slightly change the orbit and delays the crash. So then one of the leaders, Cygnus, begins the next plan, which would be launching the space shuttle that we're seeing here. Zero crashes the space shuttle into Eurasia and succeeds in destroying about 86% of it, which saves planet Earth. However, one of the other possibilities is that there is a chance that the space shuttle fails as well, If the space shuttle fails, only part of Eurasia is destroyed and it crashes on Earth, and then Zero becomes a maverick. Unfortunately, I don't have that footage because it is a little more difficult to get, but that's one of the possibilities as well. Now, the worst ending that you can get is if you don't decide to do anything. You can try to destroy Eurasia at any point, but if you just don't decide to do anything and time runs out, Eurasia inevitably collides with Earth and Zero becomes a maverick, so that's going to be the worst possible ending. However, as you guys are seeing here, in any scenario, Eurasia falls to Earth and the colony virus merges with the Sigma virus because, like we saw, you only were able to destroy 86% of it, so there were still parts that did fall to Earth, and those viruses combined, creating a brand new virus at this location that they're talking about right here. This virus is eventually dubbed the Zero virus just because of its similarities with Zero himself. And this is where the final leg of the game begins, as X and Zero head to Earth to figure out what's going on with the new Zero virus. Okay, so in this scenario we used X, and you can see Zero was the one who was defeated. Wily's insignia clearly in the background, so if you weren't sure about who created Zero, now you are. And so if you're using X, you defeat Zero after confronting him. Scenario number 2, if you're Zero, you'll confront X and 2 medical units, and you'll be labeled as a maverick by the medical units due to your immunity to the Sigma virus. And the third scenario is if Zero becomes full maverick with the virus, X will confront the true, or what is known to be the true Zero by Sigma, and he is much more powerful than he was before, but X still does narrowly manage to defeat him. Either way, after the fight, Sigma jumps in and tries to finish X off after he's been weakened by the fight, but yet Zero will jump in front of him, saving X. From here, one of 2 things can happen. If Zero is in a normal state, he'll attack Sigma with a Z-Buster, and then he collapses from exhaustion. The second scenario is if Zero became a maverick, he returns to normal and then sacrifices his life to save X. After all this, the final stage and battle takes place between Sigma, X, and Zero. Sigma finally revealing that his plan was to awaken Zero and make him become his true self, give him his true power by infecting him with the Sigma virus, massive amounts that even he wouldn't be able to overcome. And this was the main reason why Sigma spread the virus all around Earth, as he wanted to infect Zero and have Zero eventually defeat X as the end goal of his plan. Boy, this guy really carries a grudge. Eventually you end up beating Sigma's first form, and then he takes on the form of a huge unfinished body. Eventually it's revealed, especially if you're playing as Zero, that Sigma actually met Dr. Wily. Well, he doesn't outright say it, but it's highly inferred. You pretty much figure it out that he did meet Dr. Wily, and he talks about how much he hates Mega Man and everything to do with him. After you defeat Sigma, he reveals he has one final ace up his sleeve, as always. This time he's going to self-destruct his giant body to try to take out Mega Man X and Zero. After the massive explosion, it's showing Zero's body lying on the ground, as you're about to see here. His lower torso and arm destroyed. X kneeling down to pick up Zero's body and asks him, pleads with him not to die, not noticing that Sigma is directly behind him, and decides to try to take out both Mega Man X and Zero at the same time. This blows a hole in X's chest, and then Zero, seeing the opportunity, fires one last blast through Mega Man X and into Sigma. And whether you're playing as X or Zero for this ending, it ends up a little different. X's ending, as you're seeing here, X is pretty much completely destroyed as well. Dr. Light coming in, telling X to relax and that he's going to be saved and repaired. Or Zero's ending, where he has some flashbacks of his life, Dr. Wily and Iris coming into the picture and talking to Zero, telling him that he was bred for destruction and that Dr. Wily built him simply to destroy Mega Man. And Zero then dies. Now flashing back to X's ending for a minute, you see one of two scenarios play out, this one being the better one, where X takes Zero's Z-Saber and uses it in battle as a memento of Zero still fighting alongside him in memory. X saying that as long as he still has Zero's Z-Saber, he can fight any enemy. This is the ending that leads to Mega Man X6, which happens only 3 weeks later rather than 3 years. So that's one thing that's inconsistent about the timeline. I don't know if it was because this was intended to be the last game and then they kind of retconned it a little bit, or if there was some translation problems there that caused that. But real quickly, the other ending that can happen is that basically if Zero is infected and he's a Maverick, he still defeats Zero, X does, but Dr. Light erases his memories to prevent him from having to deal with the pain of having to kill Zero, so he basically doesn't remember anything. Obviously that wouldn't make much sense for a canon ending, because where do they really go from there? So I think that's why they decided to stick with X's good ending on that one. Whew. Okay, does that ending seem a little overly complex to you guys? I know it does to me, holy crap. Just a few too many paths, too many scenarios there in my opinion, especially considering the randomness of it all and how it can happen. But one thing that I did think was really neat about how all this played out was the fact that they went back to Mega Man X3. If you go back to the first video and you remember how that ended and how they talked about how Mega Man was going to have to face Zero and destroy him to save mankind, I feel like that's kind of what this was leading to, was the ending of Mega Man X5 and the way they wanted to, or the way KG and Fune wanted to end this series. And then the fact that they decided to go with Mega Man X6 was kind of a strange decision, especially considering that added into the mix as well. Okay, so we made it through all that. Hopefully you got a good understanding of everything that was going on. If not, rewind it as many times as you need to and try to look at Wikipedia, whatever you had to do. That's what I had to do for some of this stuff, so I could remember everything that was going on with all this. So anyway, now we're getting into a little more controversy here, because Mega Man X6, again, not really supposed to be in existence if it was up to Mr. Inafune. So let's see how that one turned out. I know by this time people were kind of maybe starting to get a little burned out, just like they were getting into Mega Man 5 and 6 on the Nintendo before the transition to the Super Nintendo. So let's go ahead and see how Mega Man X6 fares. Mega Man X6 coming out in December 2001. So that was really interesting, because we had Mega Man X5 coming out quite a few years after X4, and as I said, typically didn't see that kind of gap in the release dates, and now we have Mega Man X6 coming out in the same year as X5. So the fact that we had another Mega Man game only 11 months after, I think affected the quality. Myself personally, X6 was probably the least favorite of all the X games that I had played up to this point, and I think that short development cycle was a very prominent contributing factor to that. But the fact that it was a decision by Capcom to continue the series into X6 when X5 really was supposed to be the end game in the series, I think had a lot to do with its quality and why it was so poorly received compared to some of the other games in the series up to this point. As you can see here, the addition of sort of more animation in their cutscenes versus X5 I thought was interesting here. They almost kind of went back and added in some animation, not full frame animation, but little snippets here and there. And so, as I said, contrary to what you would have seen in the ending of X5, the canon ending anyway, Mega Man X6 picking up shortly after the ending of X5. And as we saw, Zero sacrificed himself to save the planet. Some of the Eurasian colony still crashed on planet Earth, spreading the newly created Zero virus around the planet, and the crash of the colony on the planet's surface, rendering the Earth uninhabitable at this point. And as you're seeing here, one of the lead researchers that was sent out to investigate destroyed pieces of the Eurasian colony gate comes into contact with parts of the Zero virus that most likely ended up there due to the previous fight between Zero, X, and Sigma. So this discovery by this character Gate sets in motion the events of Mega Man X6. Gate, due to the contact with the strange object that he finds, gets driven mad and wants to create a utopia just for Reploids. X then hears of a giant maverick that threatens an area to which he's assigned, and he goes to investigate the situation. So this time again, starting as X in the opening stage, you start off with the Falcon armor, but it's a kind of a gimped version of the Falcon armor because Alia was only able to fix parts of the dash function, so you no longer have the flight capability. Also, your Mega Buster cannot penetrate through multiple surfaces or enemies even with the Falcon armor. As you're seeing here, it's just hitting one enemy and stopping. But X also does have the Z-Saber equipped as per the story, so that's kind of neat, giving X the Z-Saber to utilize in combat, just as he was able to do in X3. After clearing the stage, you run into someone who appears to be Zero. He destroys an enemy and then vanishes. After the strange encounter with the purple Zero, you run into a new enemy called Hymax, who's a very powerful robot that X cannot damage with his normal X-Buster. Hymax says that he's investigating what's now called the Zero Nightmare virus, and that Mega Man X needs to stay out of his way. You then find out that a Reploid scientist named Isak makes an announcement saying that the ghost of Zero, dubbed Zero Nightmare as I said before, is behind the new nightmare phenomena. He sends, surprise surprise, 8 Reploids to investigate areas with high jamming suspected to be infected by the nightmare to discover the mystery surrounding it and delete Zero's ghost, with the new character Hymax leading the mission. Isak in his speech asks for volunteers to help them in their cause. X decides to volunteer and goes off to the suspected areas to investigate the nightmare, defeat the Mavericks, and rescue any Reploids that need help after being damaged in their fight with the Zero Nightmare virus. Alright guys, so let's get into some gameplay aspects of Mega Man X6 and we'll... Wait. Shield Sheldon? Shield Sheldon. You've got to be kidding me. That is one of the worst names I've ever heard for any Mega Man X or Mega Man character ever. This is going to be interesting. So similar to X5, X once again having the multiple armors for X to utilize. And besides the default Falcon armor that you get at the beginning of the game, you get the Blade armor, which enhances X's ability to use the Z-Saber. And when he charges up his X-Buster, it leaves behind a small ball of energy, just like his X-Buster from X4, or one of the versions at least. And he also gains the ability to dash in multiple directions. And he also gets the Shadow armor, which increases his maneuverability and gives him immunity to spikes similar to the Gaia armor from X5. Additionally, his X-Buster shots travel in more of a wave pattern, and they look more like shuriken than the traditional egg shape that we're all used to. And again, just like in X4, you do get the Nova armor through the use of a code, and Zero also gets his black armor. Overall, I felt like these armors were probably the weakest, both in concept and capabilities. It felt more like a play off of the armors in X5, just kind of more of the same. And I actually got pretty bored playing as X personally in X6. I preferred playing Zero most of the time. Zero didn't change much either. We're going to get into him in a minute, but X, I felt like with his armors it didn't really feel different enough to justify having all these different armor types. I would have much preferred just maybe one type of armor that was quite a bit different from what he already had and enhanced his abilities quite a bit. That's one thing I felt like the older Mega Mans had over some of the newer ones, is that you get armors in the older Mega Mans that truly enhanced your abilities, that didn't just give you small little upgrades. They were major things that changed how the game played, and with some of the newer versions of Mega Man X, you just didn't really have that. And as you rescue Reploids, you get parts from some of them that let you enhance your recovery capabilities, your weapon power, your movement speed, things like that. Fairly similar to Mega Man X5's system. The difference being with the parts system, rather than attaching a certain part to a certain piece of armor like an X5, you would attach them to the character themselves. The higher in rank you are, the more parts that you're able to equip. That pretty much covers X. Now jumping over to Zero, it's a little more unique in this game in that you actually have to unlock Zero by defeating what are called the Zero Nightmares. You find out that these purple enemies that you're facing are more like doppelgangers that are the Zero Nightmare virus. And eventually you find out that Zero has been in hiding this whole time trying to repair himself. X wasn't able to find him because Zero had hid his signal while he was in hiding, performing those repairs until he was fully repaired and ready to fight again. Now you can get through the whole game as X without even unlocking Zero, so just keep that in mind if you guys do play this. I would try to unlock Zero as soon as possible so you have more options to play if you would wish to do that. And again here, I just felt like this was kind of an unnecessary aspect of the story. The further you get into X6, it just almost felt like it really did not need to exist. It almost felt more like a side story. Zero's death in X5, or perceived death, would have been much more impactful if he wouldn't have come back here, because as all you guys know, he comes back again later in Mega Man Zero. So to have him essentially die, come back, and then be stowed away again until he comes back in Mega Man Zero just felt a little choppy and didn't feel as cohesive as it should have. Zero's gameplay, again, not feeling that much different from Mega Man X4 and 5. He does have a few different moves at his disposal again, but the main thing that you'll notice here is that his Z-Saber is a little different since Mega Man X is using his old school Z-Saber. He has one that almost looks like a lightsaber in a way. It remains straight when he swings it around. And he does still maintain the use of his Z-Buster. Can't use it in midair, can only use it on the ground once again. But pretty similar gameplay with Zero. And this leads me to my fifth and final point. Finally, we're getting there on why I think that people love Mega Man X as much as they do and why he's been around so long, is the reliability of the series. Now, that might be a negative to a lot of people, but hear me out on this. So, I think one of the reasons why Mega Man and Mega Man X fans really keep coming back, even though they don't feel a lot different, they do add the small elements to keep things feeling fresh, as I said before, but overall, a lot of the games do feel pretty similar. If you weren't a Mega Man fan, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference, aside from some small changes. But I think kind of similar to, compared to a game like Madden, for example. Madden doesn't change a whole lot from year to year, but the fans keep coming back because it's an experience that they expect, that they know, and that they enjoy. So as long as they do add those little elements to keep things fresh, it keeps fans happy. It keeps them playing, keeps them buying the new games. Now, I suppose you could look at it as a disadvantage at the same time. You could argue that because of the fact that by the time X6 came around, if you're not already a Mega Man fan, most likely you're not going to be won over by this game because it doesn't really change a whole lot compared to the older games, and that could be seen as a problem because you're not really bringing any new fans into the fold with these games. You're pretty much just maintaining your core fan base. But I felt like it was still relevant to mention that point just because I think it is still a valid reason as to why people keep coming back, because that core fan base does expect certain things from Mega Man, which is why when we got into the debacle that was X7, it shocked so many people and just surprised them at how different the game was, because we were trying to make that 2D to 3D transition. We'll explore that more in the next video, but I think that obviously the poor game design had a lot to do with people's feelings toward X7. It wasn't just the fact that it was 3D. So the ideal situation to me would be if they do come out with a new Mega Man X eventually, that they still maintain some of the aspects that people originally fell in love with, but did change the gameplay enough to bring in new fans to the series. And I think if they approach things with some fresh ideas, and there's been so many years between the last Mega Man X game and a potential new one, that I think people will be excited for a new one to come out, as long as they make the correct design decisions and story decisions that will lead it into the future. So similar to X5, you don't actually need to beat all 8 of the Robot Masters in order to get to the final stages of the game, but here we're seeing Gate being defeated. After you get through defeating all the 8 Robot Masters, or you get through and beat Hymax, you end up meeting the lead researcher, Gate. Zero, you see beating him here, and you find out that Gate used a piece of Zero's damaged body and created the Nightmare virus alongside the Zero Nightmare in an attempt to create his own utopia of Reploids and no humans. And after defeating Gate here, you find out that, surprise, surprise, he decided to recreate Sigma. So Sigma is back once again. This time he's in a very strange form, though. You can tell that he's lost his mind. I don't know if Gate couldn't complete his body, or Sigma's been destroyed so many times that there's just not a lot of him left for him to be a complete form and have a complete mind. And so once again, Zero and X successful in defeating Sigma for the umpteenth time, and Sigma threatening to come back once again in his dying breath, and you know he's going to be back to defeat Zero and X. Now if X defeats Sigma, he rescues Gate actually, so that Aelia is able to rebuild him. A similar ending is shown if X didn't find Zero, and in that case Zero decides not to return to fight, but obviously wouldn't make a whole lot of sense as a canon ending. A much more interesting ending is if Zero defeats Sigma, he requests to be sealed away until such time that the Sigma virus can be completely removed from his body. And if you guys did follow the story or are following it along with me, this of course is going to lead to the story in Mega Man Zero, which we're going to get to in the third video. But again, I just felt like this point could have been reached in X5. It was kind of an unnecessary segue into Mega Man Zero. They could have found a way to tell the story in X5 without ending up where we're at here in X6. Overall, X6 just felt like, again, a side story more than anything. It felt like just a tacked on story. You could tell that the game was put together in a short amount of time, not just because of the story, but the enemy designs, the level designs, everything just didn't feel as fleshed out as it would in a lot of the other X games. So what do you guys think about Mega Man X4, 5, and 6? Let me know down below. Do you think that Mega Man X5 has too convoluted of a story? Do you think it's just fine? Do you think Mega Man X6 felt too rushed, or do you think it was a decent game in the series? Let me know. I'm curious to see what you guys think about it. Now, if you guys want to check out some really detailed reviews on each individual X game, I'd recommend that you go check out a YouTuber called Jay's Reviews. That's J''S Reviews. The guy goes into a staggering, ludicrous amount of detail on each Mega Man X game, and he explores in depth as to why Mega Man X6 kind of felt inferior to a lot of the other ones. So highly recommend that you go check his stuff out. He does a great job in explaining all the little intricacies of what makes these games tick and why one X game would be better or worse than another. And finally, before we get to the end, I want to give a huge shout out to Apex Gamer 1080. He provided all the footage that you saw for Mega Man X3 through 6. A lot of awesome gameplay. The video wouldn't have been possible without him. So thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to check him out on Twitch at Apex Gamer 1080 for more awesome gameplay. Thanks, man. Alright guys, well that is it for Mega Man X4 through 6. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy this type of content. I'm going to keep doing stuff like this. People seem to really enjoy these retrospective, so I'm going to be getting into some other series besides Mega Man, but no, wait guys, no, I need more time to prepare. Don't make me play it yet. No. No! No!